What could a 10-year-old girl possibly say to silence an entire courtroom? Stay tuned to Dark Stories, because this shocking tale will leave you speechless. Black girl interrupts judge in court and says 2 words. The entire courtroom falls silent. There's something about a quiet courtroom, the weight of justice hanging in the air, the judge towering from their bench, and everyone on edge, waiting for the verdict. But what happens when a voice cuts through that silence, not from a seasoned lawyer or a confident witness, but from a 10-year-old girl standing against the system itself? Can 2 words really unravel a powerful judge? Keep watching Dark Stories to find out. What could she possibly say that would leave a powerful judge trembling, her world unraveling in an instant? Stay with me, because what unfolded in that courtroom will not only shock you, but leave you questioning the very foundation of fairness and courage. The Thurgood Marshall Courthouse stood as a symbol of justice, its towering columns gleaming in the morning sun. Yet, for Angela Carter, it felt like a fortress designed to keep her on the outside. She clutched her daughter Nia's hand tightly as they passed through the heavy wooden doors. Angela wore her best outfit, a simple navy blue blazer and matching skirt, but the confidence she tried to project felt paper thin under the weight of the day ahead. Inside, the air was cold, sterile, and heavy with murmurs from other courtgoers. Nia, only 10 years old, walked beside her mother with a calmness beyond her years. Her tightly braided hair shimmered under the courthouse lights, and her sharp brown eyes darted around the room, taking everything in. She held a worn notebook against her chest, a makeshift journal where she scribbled everything she thought was important, things adults often ignored. Angela knelt in front of her daughter. "Sweetheart, just stay quiet today, okay? No matter what happens, let the grown-ups handle it." Nia's lips pursed, and for a moment, she looked like she wanted to argue, but instead, she nodded. "I will, Mom." Angela stood and smoothed her skirt, drawing a deep breath. "We'll get through this," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince Nia or herself. The courtroom was a theater of tension, rows of spectators filled the benches, their faces a mixture of indifference and curiosity. At the front of the room, Judge Elizabeth Hawthorne presided from her elevated bench. She was an imposing woman in her early 60s, with piercing gray eyes and a thin-lipped expression that rarely softened. Her reputation as a no-nonsense judge preceded her, but beneath her polished exterior lay rumors of favoritism, rumors Angela couldn't afford to ignore. Angela's ex-husband, Gregory Miller, sat at the opposing table, flanked by his high-priced lawyer, Donald Whitman. Gregory exuded confidence, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin. His smirk deepened when he glanced at Angela, as though he'd already won. Angela's lawyer, Janice Holloway, shuffled papers nervously, clearly outmatched by Whitman's presence. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and the courtroom stood as Judge Hawthorne entered. Her gavel struck the bench with authority. "Be seated." Angela felt Nia's hand brush against hers as they sat down, the small gesture grounding her, but her pulse quickened when Judge Hawthorne spoke. "This is a custody hearing for the minor child, Nia Carter," the judge began, her voice sharp and unwavering. "Let's proceed." Donald Whitman rose, his every movement calculated to exude dominance. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter. My client, Mr. Gregory Miller, is a respected businessman who can provide a stable, prosperous environment for his daughter. Unfortunately, Ms. Carter, though I'm sure she's well-meaning, is financially unstable and unable to meet the child's needs." Angela's jaw tightened as Whitman's words cut into her like a blade. She wanted to shout, to defend herself, but Janice placed a calming hand on her arm. "We'll respond," Janice whispered. Gregory leaned back in his chair, his smug expression like a victory flag. Nia's eyes flicked to him, then back to the judge, her tiny hands clenching the edge of her notebook. Whitman continued, his voice dripping with faux concern. "My client only wants what's best for Nia, and given Ms. Carter's history of late rent payments and," he paused, feigning reluctance, "her reliance on multiple jobs, it's clear that Mr. Miller can provide a more secure future." Angela could feel the stares boring into her, the spectators silently judging her life. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her chin up. Janice stood to counter, but Judge Hawthorne interrupted before she could speak. "Ms. Holloway, I trust your response will address the issue of stability directly. I don't need a lecture on emotional bonds." Angela's heart sank. The tone in Hawthorne's voice felt like a verdict already passed. Nia, sitting quietly beside her mother, began scribbling furiously in her notebook. Her sharp ears caught every word Whitman and the judge exchanged. Though her mother told her to stay silent, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Gregory leaned toward Whitman and whispered something. Nia caught a few words: dinner, thanks for the help, offshore. She frowned, her pencil pressing hard against the paper as she jotted the words down. By the time the first recess was called, Angela felt like she was losing ground. Janice tried to reassure her, but her words felt hollow. Across the room, Gregory smiled confidently, shaking hands with Whitman. Nia tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mom, I need to tell you something. Not now, sweetie, Angela said, her voice strained. We'll talk later. But it's important, Nia insisted, her voice urgent but still soft enough not to draw attention. Angela sighed. Please, Nia, just stay quiet and trust me. Nia slumped back in her seat, clutching her notebook tighter. She didn't understand why adults always dismissed her, especially when she knew she was right. But she also knew this wasn't the moment to push. As the courtroom reconvened, the mood shifted. Judge Hawthorne's demeanor grew colder, her gaze lingering on Angela with thinly veiled disdain. Gregory's team moved to present their final arguments, ready to seal their victory. But Nia was watching everything, and she knew something they didn't. When the judge prepared to announce her ruling, Nia's small voice cut through the tension like a blade. You're wrong, she said. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Hawthorne glared at the child. Excuse me? Nia stood, clutching her notebook tightly. You're wrong, and I can prove it. The courtroom was utterly still, save for the faint rustle of papers as Judge Hawthorne adjusted her glasses. Her icy gray eyes locked onto Nia, as if the weight of her stare alone could silence the young girl. But Nia didn't waver, standing straight, her chin tilted slightly upward. She clutched her notebook tightly, the edges worn from her nervous grip. Angela's heart skipped a beat. Nia, sit down, she whispered harshly, her voice trembling. But Nia didn't move. Her small frame seemed to grow larger as she held her ground. Judge Hawthorne's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Young lady, this is highly inappropriate. Sit down and allow the court to proceed. Nia swallowed hard, her voice shaking but resolute. I'm sorry, Your Honor, but I can't. You're about to make a mistake. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, spectators craning their necks to get a better look at the bold child. Gregory shifted uncomfortably in his seat, leaning toward his lawyer. What's she doing? He hissed. Donald Whitman placed a hand on Gregory's arm, his confidence faltering for the first time. Stay calm, she's just a kid. But Nia wasn't just a kid. Not today. Angela rose from her seat, her face pale with panic. Your Honor, please forgive my daughter. She's just overwhelmed by the situation. Nia turned to her mother, her brown eyes filled with a mixture of urgency and determination. Mom, you have to trust me. Nia, this isn't the time. Judge Hawthorne's voice cut through their exchange. Miss Carter, control your child, or I will have her removed from the courtroom. Angela opened her mouth to protest, but Nia spoke first. If you send me out, you'll never know the truth. The judge's gaze hardened, her patience wearing thin. What truth, exactly, do you think you know, young lady? Nia took a deep breath, steadying herself. I know what Gregory did. I know how he got you to side with him. The room erupted into gasps, a wave of shock spreading like wildfire. Judge Hawthorne's composure cracked, her pale face betraying a flicker of unease before she quickly masked it. That's a very serious accusation, young lady. It's not an accusation, Nia said firmly, her voice growing steadier with each word. It's the truth, and I wrote it all down. She held up her notebook, the edges frayed and covered in faint pencil smudges. Her small hand shook slightly, but her determination never faltered. The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Hawthorne's voice was quieter now, though no less sharp. Step forward. Angela reached for Nia, desperate to pull her back, but the girl was already moving toward the front of the courtroom. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floor, each step echoing in the vast space. Gregory shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confident facade crumbling. "What the hell is she doing?" he whispered to Whitman again, his voice laced with panic. "Quiet," Whitman snapped, his eyes fixed on the judge. Standing before Judge Hawthorne, Nia placed the notebook on the desk with a reverence that suggested its contents were sacred. "This has everything I heard," she said quietly. "Dates, places, what Gregory said about you." The judge stared at the notebook but didn't touch it. Her hands, resting on the edge of the bench, trembled almost imperceptibly. "What, exactly, are you claiming to have overheard?" Nia glanced back at her mother, who was frozen in her seat, her hands clenching the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then she turned back to the judge. "A few weeks ago, my dad had dinner with his lawyer. He didn't know I was listening. He said he had a meeting with you at the Wellington, and that everything was going to be fine because you owed him a favor." More gasps filled the room. The Wellington was a high-end restaurant in Manhattan, frequented by the city's elite. Judge Hawthorne's face drained of color, but she quickly recovered, her voice cold. "That's quite an imagination you have." "It's not my imagination," Nia said, her voice rising slightly. "He talked about a payment, something about an offshore account. He even laughed about how it was going to seal the deal." Judge Hawthorne's grip on her gavel tightened. "This is outrageous." But Nia wasn't done. "He said your name. He said, 'Hawthorne owes me.' I wrote it all down." The courtroom was now a powder keg, ready to explode. Gregory rose from his seat, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous. She's just a kid. She doesn't know what she's talking about." Angela finally found her voice. "Gregory, sit down. Let her speak." Whitman grabbed Gregory's arm, his tone urgent. "Stop talking. Don't make this worse." But it was too late. The seed of doubt had already been planted, and every eye in the room was on Judge Hawthorne, waiting for her response. Judge Hawthorne's composure was unraveling, her mask of authority slipping as she glanced toward the bailiff. "Take this child back to her seat." The bailiff hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Angela stood up, her voice steady for the first time. "If you silence her now, Your Honor, you'll only make yourself look guilty." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing me of misconduct, Ms. Carter?" "I'm not accusing you of anything," Angela said, though her voice was like steel. "But if what my daughter wrote is true, the court has a responsibility to investigate." Nia watched the exchange, her young face calm, but her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing: the truth was out, and there was no going back. The courtroom was a storm of whispers, the murmurs growing louder with every passing second. Judge Hawthorne sat rigid at her bench, her usually composed face betraying cracks of unease. Her gavel lay untouched, as though even she knew that trying to restore order now would be futile. Nia stood in the center of the chaos, clutching her notebook with both hands. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to let it show. She knew this wasn't just about her or her mother, this was about justice. Angela stepped closer to Nia, her maternal instincts warring with her fear of the powerful judge. She whispered, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," Nia whispered back, her voice firmer than Angela expected. "I just want them to listen." Judge Hawthorne finally raised a trembling hand, signaling for silence. The courtroom fell into an uneasy hush, all eyes fixed on the woman who was supposed to embody justice. She leaned forward slightly, her voice icy. "Ms. Carter," she addressed Nia directly, "you've made a very serious claim. Do you understand the consequences of lying in a court of law?" Nia swallowed but didn't back down. "I'm not lying. Everything I said is true." Whitman, Gregory's lawyer, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is a farce. We're allowing a 10-year-old to derail these proceedings with baseless accusations. This is preposterous." Gregory nodded fervently beside him, but his face betrayed a sheen of sweat. His usual smugness had been replaced by a nervous energy, his leg bouncing under the table. Angela's lawyer, Janice Holloway, stood as well, her voice surprisingly steady. Your Honor, while my colleague may dismiss the child's testimony, the specifics she provided cannot be ignored. A meeting at the Wellington, offshore accounts, these are not details a child would fabricate. Hawthorne's lips thinned, her sharp gaze flicking between Nia, Angela, and the lawyers. Miss Holloway, are you suggesting this court halt proceedings based on the word of a child? I'm suggesting, Janice said firmly, that the allegations merit investigation. To proceed without addressing them would undermine the integrity of this court. Hawthorne's hands gripped the edge of her bench, her knuckles white. For the first time, the cracks in her unflappable demeanor were visible to all. She glanced at Nia again, as though weighing whether the girl's testimony could truly threaten her. Miss Carter, the judge said, her tone measured but strained, if you truly believe what you've written in that notebook, then you will allow it to be examined. Will you hand it over? Nia hesitated, looking to her mother for reassurance. Angela gave a small nod, her eyes shining with pride and fear. Slowly, Nia stepped forward and placed the notebook on the clerk's desk. Everything's in there, she said quietly, her voice steady. The clerk picked it up and handed it to Judge Hawthorne, who hesitated before opening it. The silence in the room was suffocating as she flipped through the pages, her expression growing darker with each word she read. Suddenly, Gregory stood, his voice loud and desperate. This is absurd. She's a child. She doesn't understand what she's talking about. Angela turned to face him, her voice sharp. She understands more than you think, Gregory. She understands honesty, which is more than I can say for you. Judge Hawthorne slammed her gavel down, her voice cracking slightly. Enough. Mr. Miller, sit down. Gregory froze, his face flushed, before sinking back into his chair. The judge set the notebook down carefully, as though it were a fragile piece of evidence that might explode in her hands. Her face was pale now, her earlier composure eroding with each passing second. Miss Carter, she said slowly, turning back to Nia, you claim to have overheard this conversation between your father and his lawyer. Can you recall the exact date and location? Nia nodded. It was 3 weeks ago, on a Friday, at his house. I was supposed to be in bed, but I couldn't sleep. I heard them in the living room. The specificity of her answer caused another ripple of murmurs in the courtroom. Janice Holloway stepped forward. Your Honor, if the child's testimony is accurate, this warrants further inquiry. I request a subpoena for financial records tied to the Wellington and any offshore accounts linked to Mr. Miller or other involved parties. Whitman immediately objected. This is outrageous. You're turning this court into a witch hunt based on the ramblings of a child. Ramblings? Janice shot back, her voice rising. She provided details, dates and locations. If Mr. Miller and Judge Hawthorne have nothing to hide, what harm is there in verifying the claims? Judge Hawthorne's face hardened, her authority teetering on the edge of collapse. She looked at Nia again, but this time there was no condescension in her gaze, only calculation. Bailiff, she said finally, her voice hollow, escort the child back to her seat. Angela stood as the bailiff approached Nia, her voice trembling but firm. She's not leaving until you promise to look into this. The tension in the room was unbearable. Gregory sat stiffly, his hands clenched into fists, while Whitman whispered furiously in his ear. Judge Hawthorne leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. This court is adjourned for recess. Counsel, I suggest you prepare for further proceedings. With a loud crack of the gavel, she rose and walked swiftly out of the courtroom, her robes billowing behind her. The room erupted into chaos, spectators whispered loudly, reporters outside the courtroom door craned their necks for information, and Gregory stormed out, dragging Whitman with him. Angela knelt down beside Nia, pulling her into a tight hug. You were amazing, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so proud of you. Nia pulled back slightly, her eyes filled with determination. It's not over, Mom. She's scared now. We just have to keep going. Angela looked into her daughter's eyes, seeing not just a child, but a fighter, a spark of hope she hadn't felt in years. You're right, Angela said softly, brushing a hand over Nia's braids. We'll keep going together. The recess was meant to last 15 minutes, but an hour had passed, and the courtroom remained in limbo. Angela and Nia sat in tense silence at their table, surrounded by the weight of uncertainty. The whispers and murmurs in the gallery had quieted to hushed conversations, but the atmosphere felt no less charged. Angela's gaze flickered toward the door through which Judge Hawthorne had exited. She wasn't sure what the delay meant, but her instincts told her that the judge wasn't simply cooling off, something was happening behind closed doors. Nia sat beside her, her notebook gone, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her legs swung slightly under the chair, a subtle reminder that despite her bravery, she was still just a child. Yet her expression was one of quiet determination, her mind clearly working through the events of the morning. "Are you scared?" Angela asked softly, leaning closer. Nia shook her head, though her voice was small when she replied. "Not really." "Are you?" Angela hesitated, then nodded a little. "But I'm also proud of you. You were so brave." Nia's lips curled into a faint smile, but it faded quickly. "Do you think they'll believe me?" Angela squeezed her daughter's hand. "The truth is on our side. That's all that matters." Across the room, Gregory paced near his table, his face a mask of frustration. His lawyer, Whitman, sat with his head bowed, furiously scribbling notes. Every few seconds, Gregory would lean down to hiss something into Whitman's ear, his gestures growing more frantic with each exchange. "I told you this would happen," Gregory snapped under his breath. Whitman didn't look up. "Calm down. We can control this." "Control this?" "She knows about the meeting, how?" Whitman's pen paused mid-sentence. "It doesn't matter how. What matters is making her look unreliable." Gregory glanced toward Nia and Angela, his expression darkening. "She's just a kid. How hard can it be to discredit her?" Whitman didn't respond, his focus now on the strategy he was hastily piecing together. The door to the judge's chambers finally opened, and the courtroom stilled. Judge Hawthorne stepped out, her robes flowing behind her, her expression colder than before. She moved to her bench with measured precision, but the subtle tightening of her jaw betrayed her discomfort. The bailiff's voice broke the silence. "All rise." Everyone stood as Hawthorne settled into her seat. She paused, surveying the room with a critical eye, before gesturing for them to sit. "This court is now back in session," she announced, her voice sharp but quieter than usual. Angela noticed the faint tremor in the judge's hand as she adjusted her papers. It was a small detail, but one that filled her with cautious hope. Judge Hawthorne's gaze landed on Angela and Nia. "Ms. Carter, you have made allegations that this court cannot ignore. However, this is a custody hearing, not a trial for corruption. I must stress the importance of maintaining the focus of these proceedings." Angela felt her stomach sink. Was this her way of dismissing Nia's claims? But then Hawthorne continued. "That said, I have reviewed the notes provided by the child, as well as the specificity of her testimony. While I make no judgment at this time regarding the veracity of her claims, I find it prudent to order an independent inquiry into the matter." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Gregory shot up from his chair. "This is ridiculous. You're actually entertaining this nonsense?" The judge's gaze snapped to him, her voice like ice. "Mr. Miller, sit down. Another outburst, and I will hold you in contempt." Gregory froze, his face red with suppressed anger, before dropping heavily into his seat. Whitman rose cautiously, his tone measured. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. These allegations are serious." Hawthorne interrupted, her voice rising. "And if there is any merit to them, this court has an obligation to investigate. If you have concerns about the timeline of this case, you may file a motion to address them." Whitman's mouth opened, but he seemed to think better of arguing further. He sat down, his jaw tight. Angela exhaled a shaky breath, her grip on Nia's hand tightening. For the first time, it felt like the tide was shifting. Judge Hawthorne turned back to Angela's lawyer. "Ms. Holloway, you may proceed with your case. The court will consider the child's testimony as part of the overall record." Janice nodded, rising to her feet. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to call my next witness. As the hearing resumed, Angela stole a glance at Nia, who was watching everything with wide, attentive eyes. Her daughter had just done something extraordinary, something few adults would have dared. And yet, Angela couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. The courtroom settled into an uneasy rhythm as Janice Holloway called Angela to the stand. Angela adjusted the lapels of her blazer and rose from her seat, casting a reassuring glance at Nia before walking to the witness stand. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. Once seated, Angela met Janice's steady gaze, her lawyer's calm demeanor giving her a flicker of confidence, though the watchful eyes of Judge Hawthorne and Gregory's looming presence at the opposing table felt like shadows creeping ever closer. "Ms. Carter," Janice began, her tone measured and professional, "can you describe your current living situation?" Angela nodded, her voice clear but soft. "I live in a small apartment in Harlem with my daughter, Nia. It's not much, but it's home. I work as a nurse, mostly night shifts, to make sure I can support her." Janice offered an encouraging smile. "And despite your long hours, how do you ensure Nia's well-being?" "I make her my priority," Angela replied, sitting a little straighter. "I plan my shifts around her school schedule and make sure she has everything she needs. She's a bright, independent girl, but I'm always there for her." Gregory's lawyer, Whitman, leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable as he whispered to Gregory. As the questioning continued, Angela detailed her devotion to Nia, painting a picture of a loving, resilient mother doing her best under difficult circumstances. But as Janice wrapped up her questioning, Whitman stood, his every movement calculated to exude authority. "Miss Carter," he began, his tone almost condescending, "while I'm sure you believe you're doing your best, would you agree that your financial instability puts Nia at a disadvantage?" Angela's jaw tightened. "I may not have a lot of money, but Nia is never without what she needs." Whitman's lips curled into a faint smirk. "Needs, perhaps, but what about opportunities? Extracurricular activities, a private education, can you provide those?" Angela's hands clenched the edge of the witness stand. "Nia doesn't need a private school to succeed. She's doing well in her classes and has her sights set on big dreams. I support her in every way I can." Whitman pounced. "And yet, you work night shifts, leaving her alone for long stretches of time. Wouldn't you agree that Mr. Miller, with his substantial resources and flexible schedule, could offer her a more secure environment?" Angela's heart pounded, her resolve wavering under the scrutiny. Before she could respond, a small voice rang out from the gallery. "She's not alone." The courtroom stilled as all eyes turned to Nia, who had risen from her seat. Angela's heart sank. "Nia, sit down." But Nia stepped forward, her voice louder now. "I'm not alone when Mom works. She makes sure I have everything. She checks on me during her breaks, and we call each other before I go to bed. We're fine." Judge Hawthorne's gavel struck the bench sharply. "Ms. Carter, you've already had your say. Return to your seat immediately." Nia's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't argue. With a quick glance at her mother, she returned to her seat, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. Whitman smiled thinly, his gaze shifting back to Angela. "Your daughter is clearly protective of you. Admirable. But wouldn't you agree that her testimony reflects the burden she feels to defend you?" Angela's chest tightened. "Nia isn't burdened. She's strong because she's had to be. That's what I've taught her, to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Whitman leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a softer, more insidious tone. "And do you think that's fair to a 10-year-old, to teach her that she has to fight your battles for you?" The question hung in the air like a dagger. Angela opened her mouth to respond, but the weight of his words left her momentarily speechless. Judge Hawthorne intervened, her voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Whitman, I suggest you return to the matter at hand." Whitman nodded, feigning humility. "Of course, Your Honor." He returned to his seat, his expression triumphant, while Angela stepped down from the stand, her shoulders heavy with the burden of his accusations. As Angela returned to her seat beside Nia, the little girl reached out, her hand finding her mother's. You did great, Mom, she whispered. Angela squeezed her daughter's hand but couldn't find the words to respond. Her heart ached, both for herself and for the unfairness Nia was forced to endure at such a young age. The next phase of the hearing moved slowly, with procedural matters and evidence reviews consuming the remaining time. Yet, despite the drawn-out proceedings, Angela felt the tide of momentum shifting against her. Judge Hawthorne's impartial mask seemed to slip, her questions often favoring Whitman's narrative, while Gregory sat smugly, his confidence restored. Nia watched it all, her sharp eyes flicking between the judge and Gregory. She bit her lip, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't yet know how to voice. When the court adjourned for the day, Angela and Nia left the courthouse together, the cool evening air a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. Angela sighed, running a hand through her hair. We'll keep fighting, Nia, no matter what. Nia looked up at her mother, her expression thoughtful. I know, Mom. But we're not the only ones fighting anymore. They're scared of us. Angela paused, her brow furrowing. Scared? Nia nodded. I saw it in their faces, the judge, Dad, Mr. Whitman. They're scared because they know we're telling the truth. Angela knelt, cupping Nia's face in her hands. Sweetheart, you've been so brave, but I don't want you to think this is your fight to win. It's mine. Nia's eyes softened, but her resolve didn't waver. It's our fight, Mom. And we're going to win it together. Angela pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, holding on to the hope that her words were more than just a child's optimism. The following morning, the courthouse loomed once more in the crisp light of dawn. Angela and Nia arrived early, their steps echoing through the near-empty halls. The weight of the day ahead felt heavier than ever, but Angela was determined not to let it show. She walked with her head held high, though her hands gripped Nia's just a little too tightly. Mom, you're squeezing, Nia whispered, glancing up. Angela immediately loosened her grip, smiling apologetically. Sorry, sweetheart. I guess I'm just a little nervous. Nia tilted her head. You don't have to be. We've got the truth on our side. Angela paused for a moment, struck by the simplicity and power of her daughter's words. You're right, she said softly, brushing a stray braid from Nia's face. We do. They reached the courtroom doors just as Janice Holloway arrived, her briefcase in one hand and a determined look in her eyes. Morning, Angela, Nia, she said warmly, bending slightly to meet Nia's gaze. You ready to face them again? Nia nodded, her face calm but her grip on her notebook, now returned to her, tight. I'm ready. The courtroom filled quickly, the energy in the room more charged than the day before. Gregory sat at his table, his polished appearance marred by the tension visible in his clenched jaw. Whitman was furiously typing on his laptop, occasionally glancing toward Angela and Nia, as if sizing up his next move. Judge Hawthorne entered shortly after, her expression unreadable but her presence commanding immediate silence. The bailiff's announcement cut through the room, and everyone rose, then sat, as she settled behind her bench. This court is now in session, Hawthorne said, her voice sharp and controlled. We will continue with testimony and evidence review. Ms. Holloway, you may proceed. Janice stood, her posture radiating confidence. Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to introduce a piece of evidence that directly supports the claims made yesterday by my client's daughter, Nia Carter. The room stilled as Janice held up a printed document. This is a record of transactions tied to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, linked to Mr. Gregory Miller. The account shows a deposit that aligns with the time frame described by Nia Carter, one day after Mr. Miller's alleged dinner with Judge Hawthorne. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, followed by a low murmur of voices. Whitman's head snapped up, his face pale, while Gregory shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Whitman rose immediately, his voice sharp. Objection. This is speculative at best. The connection to my client is circumstantial, and introducing it into evidence is highly prejudicial. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed as she looked at Janice. Ms. Holloway, do you have any corroborating evidence to link this account to the allegations made yesterday? Janice didn't falter. Your Honor, we have additional witnesses and evidence that will provide further clarity. I am requesting a subpoena to obtain records from the Wellington restaurant, which will confirm the meeting between Mr. Miller and parties relevant to this case." Whitman's voice rose again, his tone bordering on desperation. "Your Honor, this is a blatant attempt to derail the custody hearing with baseless accusations. My client has nothing to hide." Nia's voice broke through the tension, quiet but firm. "Then why are you so scared?" All eyes turned to Nia, who sat with her hands folded on the table, her face calm despite the weight of her words. Whitman's mouth opened, but no words came out. Gregory glared at his daughter, his face twisted in anger. "Ms. Carter," Hawthorne said, her tone sharp but not as icy as before, "this is not the time for commentary. Please remain seated and quiet." Nia nodded, her gaze never wavering from Whitman. The tension in the room was thick as Janice continued. "Your Honor, I believe the evidence warrants further investigation. If this court values justice, it cannot dismiss these claims without due diligence." Hawthorne sat back, her expression unreadable as she considered the motion. For a moment, the courtroom held its collective breath. "Motion granted," the judge said finally. "Subpoenas will be issued for the relevant records. However, I remind all parties that this remains a custody hearing. Until conclusive evidence is presented, the focus of these proceedings will remain on the welfare of the child." Janice nodded, her face betraying a small flicker of satisfaction. "Understood, Your Honor." The rest of the day unfolded in a slow, grinding rhythm. Witnesses were called, questioned, and dismissed. Angela testified again, this time more confidently, speaking with passion about her commitment to Nia's well-being. Whitman countered with his usual attempts to undermine her credibility, but the cracks in his confidence were beginning to show. Meanwhile, Gregory grew increasingly agitated, his frustration bubbling over in whispered arguments with his lawyer. Nia watched him closely, her sharp eyes catching every flicker of unease, every clenched fist, and bitten lip. As the hearing drew to a close for the day, Judge Hawthorne addressed the court. "This matter is far from resolved. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and the room erupted into motion. Angela and Nia left the courthouse quietly, their steps slow and deliberate. The evening air was cool, and the city buzzed around them, oblivious to the battle being fought within those walls. "Mom," Nia said as they walked, her voice soft but steady, "do you think they'll look at the restaurant records?" Angela glanced down at her daughter, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and worry. "They have to. And if they do, they'll see the truth." Nia nodded, her grip on her notebook tightening. "Then we're going to win." Angela smiled, pulling her daughter closer as they continued down the busy sidewalk. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to win." The next morning, Angela and Nia arrived early at the courthouse once again. The air felt heavier today, as though the truth they were inching toward had begun to ripple through the walls of the courtroom itself. Angela noticed how the security guards at the entrance looked at them with a flicker of recognition now, no longer indifferent, but curious. News of the previous day's revelations had clearly begun to spread. Angela clutched Nia's hand as they made their way to the courtroom, the little girl walking with purpose, her notebook once again tucked firmly under her arm. "Mom," Nia said, breaking the silence, "do you think they're scared of what we know?" Angela glanced down at her daughter, unsure how to answer. "Maybe," she said carefully, "but whether they're scared or not doesn't matter. What matters is that we're telling the truth." Nia nodded, her gaze fixed ahead. The truth always matters. The courtroom was already buzzing with low murmurs when they entered. Gregory sat at his table, his expression a mix of anger and unease. His lawyer, Whitman, was hunched over a pile of documents, his face tight with concentration. Angela noticed how neither of them seemed as polished today, Gregory's usual air of superiority now tinged with frustration, and Whitman's confidence cracked by the growing pressure. Janice Holloway was already seated at their table, reviewing her notes. She looked up as Angela and Nia approached, offering a small smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "How are you both holding up?" "We're okay," Angela replied, though her voice betrayed her nerves. "Just hoping today goes well." Janice nodded. "It will. We've got the subpoenas now, and the restaurant has already confirmed the meeting took place, It's only a matter of time before the rest of the pieces fall into place. Nia perked up at that. They confirmed it? Janice smiled at her. They did. Now we just need the financial records to tie everything together. Nia glanced at Gregory, her eyes narrowing. He's going to hate that. Janice chuckled softly. Probably. When Judge Hawthorne entered, the room fell silent. She took her seat, her gavel striking the bench sharply. This court is now in session, she announced, her voice steady but lacking its usual sharpness. Miss Holloway, you may continue with your case. Janice rose, her confidence palpable. Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to revisit the allegations made by my client's daughter, Nia Carter, regarding Mr. Miller's actions. As of this morning, we have received confirmation from the Wellington restaurant that Mr. Miller and his lawyer met on the dates specified by Nia. Additionally, we are awaiting bank records that may further corroborate these claims. Whitman stood abruptly, his voice tinged with irritation. Your Honor, once again, I must object. This is a custody hearing, not a criminal trial. These delays are prejudicing my client's case. Hawthorne raised a hand, silencing him. Your objection is noted, Mr. Whitman. However, the court has an obligation to consider all relevant information, especially when it pertains to potential misconduct. Proceed, Ms. Holloway. As Janice continued to outline their evidence, Angela watched Gregory closely. His usual smug demeanor was entirely gone, replaced by restless fidgeting. He whispered to Whitman frequently, his agitation growing with each exchange. Nia, too, was watching, her sharp eyes following every movement, every expression. And when Gregory leaned forward to whisper again, her small voice cut through the air. He's scared. Angela's breath caught. Nia, she began, but it was too late. Whitman stood again, his frustration boiling over. Your Honor, I must insist that this child stop making unfounded remarks. This is completely inappropriate. Hawthorne's gavel struck the bench sharply. Enough, Ms. Carter. While your observations may be interesting, they are not evidence. Please refrain from speaking out of turn. Nia nodded, sinking back into her seat, but the faintest smile played on her lips. She had seen what she needed to see: Gregory's face flushed with anger, his composure unraveling. The next witness Janice called was Mr. Stephen Bradley, the manager of the Wellington. A tall, thin man with graying hair, Bradley approached the stand with the cautious demeanor of someone who didn't want to get involved in something messy but knew he had no choice. Mr. Bradley, Janice began, can you confirm whether Mr. Gregory Miller dined at your restaurant on the evening of October 14th? Bradley adjusted his tie nervously. Yes, I can confirm that Mr. Miller and another gentleman were seated in one of our private dining rooms. And who was this other gentleman? Janice asked. Bradley hesitated. I don't know his name, but he was older, gray-haired, very well dressed. He seemed important. Janice nodded. Thank you. And can you confirm whether Mr. Miller paid for the dinner? Yes, Bradley said. It was charged to his credit card. Do you have a copy of the receipt? I do. Bradley handed a document to the court clerk, who passed it to Janice. She held it up for the court to see. This receipt shows a payment for $1,275, charged to Mr. Miller's card, Janice said. It also includes the date and the room number where the dinner took place. Whitman stood again, his voice rising. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. A dinner proves nothing. Perhaps not, Janice countered smoothly, but when combined with the testimony of Nia Carter and the forthcoming bank records, it paints a very clear picture. Judge Hawthorne's expression tightened. She looked at Gregory, her gray eyes piercing. Mr. Miller, do you have any explanation for this meeting? Gregory hesitated, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for an answer. Finally, he said, it was just a business dinner. Nothing more. And the payment Nia described? Hawthorne pressed. Gregory stiffened. I don't know what she's talking about. Nia leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. You're lying. The word hung in the air, soft but powerful. Gregory shot her a glare, but it did nothing to shake her resolve. By the time court adjourned for the day, the tension in the room was palpable. As Angela and Nia left, Janice walked with them, her stride purposeful. "We're making progress," she said. "It's slow, but we're getting there." Angela nodded, though the exhaustion in her eyes was evident. "I just hope it's enough." Nia looked up at both of them, her voice calm but firm. "It will be. They can't hide the truth forever." Angela smiled faintly, pulling her daughter into a hug. "You're right, sweetheart. They can't." As they walked out into the cool evening air, Angela couldn't help but feel that the cracks were beginning to show. It was only a matter of time before the facade Gregory and Judge Hawthorne had built came crumbling down. The courtroom was full the next morning, the air buzzing with anticipation. Word of the previous day's testimony had spread, and the gallery was packed with curious onlookers and a few reporters. Angela felt the weight of their stares but focused on the seat beside her, where Nia sat with her notebook clutched tightly. "You ready for today?" Angela whispered. Nia nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "We're getting closer." Across the room, Gregory and his lawyer, Whitman, were deep in conversation. Gregory's face was pale, his usual confidence gone. Every so often, he glanced at Nia, his expression a mix of anger and fear. When Judge Hawthorne entered, the room fell silent. She took her seat, her gavel striking the bench sharply. "This court is now in session," she announced, her tone colder than usual, her demeanor less composed. Janice Holloway stood immediately, her voice clear and firm. "Your Honor, I have obtained the financial records subpoenaed from the Cayman Islands account tied to Mr. Gregory Miller. These records directly corroborate the claims made by Nia Carter." She handed a folder to the court clerk, who delivered it to Judge Hawthorne. The judge opened it, her eyes scanning the pages quickly. "These records," Janice continued, "show a deposit of $250,000 into an account linked to Judge Elizabeth Hawthorne, dated 2 days after the meeting at the Wellington." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Angela's heart raced as she watched Judge Hawthorne's face grow visibly paler. Whitman stood abruptly, his voice raised. "Your Honor, this is a baseless accusation. There is no evidence to suggest this money was tied to any misconduct." Janice's voice was steady. "The timing, the amount, and the connection to the meeting described by Nia Carter all suggest otherwise. Furthermore, we have obtained emails between Mr. Miller and his lawyer, referencing a guaranteed ruling in this case." The clerk handed another set of documents to the judge. Hawthorne's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through them. "Your Honor," Janice pressed, "this evidence warrants an immediate investigation into the integrity of this trial." Judge Hawthorne's gavel struck the bench, but it lacked its usual authority. "This is highly irregular," she said, her voice faltering. "This court cannot proceed based on incomplete investigations." Whitman seized the opportunity, his voice loud and forceful. "I move to dismiss these allegations entirely. This is a distraction designed to undermine my client's case." But before the judge could respond, Nia stood, her voice cutting through the noise. "You're scared because you know it's true." All eyes turned to the young girl, her small frame standing tall against the tension in the room. "Ms. Carter, sit down," Hawthorne snapped, her voice cracking. Nia didn't move. "You took money to help my dad win. You thought no one would notice because I'm just a kid. But I did." Hawthorne's composure shattered, her face pale, her hands shaking. For a long moment, she said nothing, her gaze locked on Nia. Finally, she rose from her seat. "This court is adjourned pending further review. Bailiff, clear the courtroom." Her gavel struck the bench, but it did little to restore order. The room erupted into chaos as spectators whispered, reporters scrambled for their notes, and Gregory shouted angrily at Whitman. The investigation moved quickly after that day. Within weeks, the evidence against Judge Hawthorne and Gregory Miller was undeniable. Hawthorne was disbarred and arrested for corruption, her long career tarnished by the scandal. Gregory faced charges for bribery and fraud, his reputation and business crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. Angela was granted full custody of Nia in a retrial overseen by a fair and impartial judge. The ruling acknowledged not only her dedication as a mother but also the extraordinary courage of her daughter. Months later, Angela and Nia stood outside their small apartment. It was moving day. A local civil rights organization, inspired by Nia's bravery, had helped secure a scholarship for Nia and a better home for their family. "Ready to see our new house?" Angela asked, smiling down at her daughter. Nia grinned, her eyes bright with excitement. "I can't wait." As they climbed into the car, Nia clutched her notebook tightly. "Mom," she said softly, "do you think we made a difference?" Angela reached over, brushing a hand gently over her daughter's braids. "We didn't just make a difference, sweetheart. We proved that no matter how small your voice is, the truth will always be louder." Nia nodded, her heart swelling with pride. She opened her notebook and began scribbling again, her thoughts already turning to the future. Years later, Nia Carter stood on the steps of the Thurgood Marshall Courthouse, her black judicial robes flowing in the wind. As a newly appointed judge, she glanced up at the building that had once felt so intimidating and smiled. Her mother stood beside her, older now but still radiating the quiet strength that had carried them through so much. "You did it," Angela said, tears in her eyes. "No," Nia replied, her voice steady. "We did it." Hand in hand, they walked into the courthouse together, ready to continue their fight for justice, this time from the bench. And so, with just 2 words, a brave 10-year-old girl exposed the truth and brought justice to light. Her courage reminded us all that no matter how small or powerless we may feel, standing up for what's right can make all the difference. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for dark stories, so you never miss another inspiring tale. Your support helps us share these powerful moments with the world. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice always finds its way.